In a city of dazzling lights and shadowed secrets, one woman's world is about to implode. She thought she had the perfect life, the perfect husband, a future sealed with a loving promise. But tonight, at the most prestigious event of the year, she'll discover her gilded cage is nothing but a beautiful lie. And in front of everyone, she's not just going to expose the truth. It's a story about power, and the devastating price of underestimating a woman who has nothing left to lose. He was toasting his future, his gaze locked on the sultry blonde beside him, a woman who was not his wife. Across the grand ballroom, the city's elite watched, whispering behind their hands. And she wasn't just a guest tonight. The power was all hers. The air in the back of the Bentley was a sterile, climate-controlled silence, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Josephine Davenport Pierce. Outside, the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan glittered like a river of scattered diamonds. For the past 4 months, her husband, Nathaniel Pierce, had been a ghost in their Fifth Avenue penthouse. He was a man made of late-night arrivals that smelled of a perfume not her own, a cloying, musky scent she'd identified as black orchid, and early morning departures before the sun had a chance to expose the lies from the night before. The weekend trips were for investor meetings in Geneva. The hushed phone calls he took on the terrace were with legal counsel. Nathaniel was a titan of tech, a self-made millionaire who had clawed his way up from a background so unremarkable he refused to speak of it. He had the kind of ruthless ambition that both fascinated and terrified the old money establishment. The Davenport name was a key, one that opened doors his billions couldn't. For a time, she believed his affection was genuine. He was charming, attentive, and made her feel like the center of a universe he was building just for them. The signs had been subtle at first, a credit card statement she'd seen by accident, listing extravagant purchases from Cartier and La Perla, gifts she had never received. The final, brutal confirmation had come not from a private investigator, but from the vapid, glossy pages of a gossip blog. A grainy photo, taken with a long lens, showed Nathaniel on a yacht in St. Bart's, his arm draped possessively around a willowy blonde. Her name, the article gleefully reported, was Chloe Decker, a 24-year-old Instagram model and aspiring actress whose primary talent seemed to be attaching herself to powerful men. The caption read, "Tech mogul Nate Pierce warms up with a new model in the Caribbean sun." It wasn't just the betrayal that cut so deeply. He wasn't even trying to hide it. It was a message, a declaration that he had outgrown her, that the security and legacy she represented were no longer enough to satisfy his voracious appetite for more. Her first instinct was to shatter something. Her second was to call her father, Robert Davenport. When she was finished, his voice was calm, but with an underlying edge of steel that had made corporate raiders tremble. "Josephine," he said, "you will not give him the satisfaction of a public breakdown. We do not crumble. We consolidate. We strategize, and we win. The gala is tonight. You know what you have to do." Crying in her penthouse would achieve nothing. The plan they had been formulating for the past 2 weeks, a contingency she had prayed she would never have to use, was now her only path forward. The Bentley pulled up to the curb in front of Cipriani Wall Street. 12. Photographers swarmed the red carpet, their flashes creating a stroboscopic, disorienting effect. Josephine took a deep, steadying breath, the cool air filling her lungs. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, his voice soft with unspoken sympathy. She gave him a small, determined smile. "Just for tonight." She wore a bespoke gown of deep emerald silk that fell gracefully over her pregnant form, a color that accentuated the fire in her auburn hair and the fierce resolve in her green eyes. She was not a victim. Soaring marble columns reached up to a domed ceiling painted with frescoes, and crystal chandeliers the size of small cars dripped light onto the assembled guests. 3. The air hummed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet. This was Josephine's world, a world of hushed influence and unspoken rules, a world Nathaniel had so desperately wanted to conquer. She moved through the crowd with an easy grace, greeting fellow board members, old family friends, and city dignitaries. Each smile she offered was genuine, yet guarded. They saw Josephine Davenport, the elegant, pregnant, the perfect hostess. She exchanged pleasantries with a U.S. senator and discussed a new pediatric wing with the CEO of Mount Sinai. She was performing the role she was born to, a dance of diplomacy and charm she had mastered before she could walk. And then she saw them. And beside him, clinging to his arm like a designer accessory, was Chloe Decker. She was poured into a shimmering gold dress that left little to the imagination, her platinum blonde hair styled in a way that screamed for attention. She wasn't in love. A wave of nausea, sharper than any morning sickness she had experienced, washed over Josephine. To bring her here, to this event. It was the heart of the Davenport family's legacy. It was a sanctuary of hope built by her grandmother to honor a child she had lost. For Nathaniel to desecrate this space with his tawdry affair was an act of profound disrespect, a calculated strike against everything she held sacred. Old money matrons fanned themselves with their programs, their faces masks of delicious scandal. Nathaniel finally spotted Josephine across the room. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something guilt, surprise crossed his face. "I'm glad you made it. I was worried you weren't feeling up to it." She didn't look at him, instead keeping her gaze on a point over his shoulder. "It's a very important night for my family." He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "It's not what it looks like. She's the daughter of a business associate, a potential investor. I'm just being hospitable." He thought she was a fool. After all this time, he still believed she was the naive, trusting girl he had married, not the woman who had spent a lifetime watching men like him operate. Her gaze was flat, devoid of the warmth he was used to. Before he could respond, her father, Robert Davenport, appeared at her side. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 60s with a full head of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He then turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon Nathaniel with the force of a physical blow. The look of pure, unadulterated contempt was enough. She saw Nathaniel standing alone, his face a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. He had wanted to make a statement tonight, to show this world that he was his own man, bound by no one. And in a way, he had succeeded. He retreated back to Chloe's side, his posture rigid, grabbing 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and handing one to her. It was a fatal miscalculation. The evening progressed with the clockwork precision of all Davenport-hosted events. The speeches from the hospital beneficiaries were heartwarming, and the silent auction was raising astronomical sums. From her seat at the head table, nestled between her father and the mayor of New York, Josephine played her part to perfection. All the while, she was acutely aware of Nathaniel and Chloe at a table across the room sponsored by his tech company, Pierce Innovations. They were putting on a show. Nathaniel, for his part, leaned into her, whispering in her ear, creating a bubble of intimacy in the cavernous ballroom. He was rattled. He was used to being the one in control, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Then came the part of the evening reserved for major donors. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice resonating through the hall. "Tonight, we have been blessed with incredible generosity." He gave Chloe's hand a squeeze before striding towards the stage, the spotlight following him. This was it. Nathaniel took the microphone, a confident, predatory smile on his face. "We write code that connects the globe, but none of it matters if we don't build a foundation of hope for our children." The crowd was warming, too. He was winning them over. Josephine watched, her expression unreadable. Her father placed a reassuring hand over hers on the table. Nathaniel was nearing the end of his speech. His eyes left the general audience and scanned the room until they found Chloe. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. Everyone who had been whispering all night knew what was happening. This was no longer a speech about charity. It was a declaration. A waiter brought him a glass of champagne on stage. He looked directly at Chloe Decca, a private, intimate smile playing on his lips. He had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his own life. The applause was scattered, uncertain. The meaning of his words, of his pointed gaze, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The scandal was no longer a whisper. Nathaniel, basking in what he believed was his moment of victory, walked off the stage. He didn't see the pitying glances being sent toward the head table. And most importantly, he didn't see the terrifyingly calm, almost serene expression that had settled over his wife. He had no idea she was about to burn the entire book. The roaring in her ears subsided. The frantic pounding of her heart slowed to a steady, resolute rhythm. The pain was still there, a white-hot ember deep in her chest, but it was being rapidly cooled by something else, an icy, crystalline certainty. He had given her the gift of clarity. There were no more doubts, no more hopes for reconciliation, no more wondering if she was misreading the signs. His face was a mask of controlled fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped his water glass. Josephine met his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw not the fragility of a heartbroken daughter, but the reflection of his own iron will. She excused herself from the table, needing a moment alone before the maelstrom. She didn't retreat to the powder room, where she would be met with sympathetic whispers and cloying pity. Instead, she walked with purpose towards the backstage area, her emerald gown flowing behind her. Leaning against the cool brick wall, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on the tiny life inside her. This was about the future of her child. A future she would not allow to be shaped by a man of such casual cruelty and profound weakness. She would not raise her son or daughter in a house built on lies. Her mother, who had passed away 3 years ago, had been the chairwoman of the Starlight Foundation for 25 years. It had been her life's work. The plan had always been for Josephine to be revealed tonight, a surprise to the philanthropic community. Her mother had envisioned it as a triumphant moment, a passing of the generational mantle. It was a text from her lawyer, a man whose retainer was almost as legendary as his ruthlessness. All assets frozen. This one from the editor-in-chief of the New York Times, a woman Josephine had known since childhood. "We're ready to run with the story. Your statement is all we need." On them, in her elegant script, were the bullet points for her original speech. The pieces fluttered from her fingers onto the dusty floor. She didn't need a script anymore. Nathaniel had given her all the material she needed. A young production assistant peeked around the corner. A slow, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time that night. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated power. She walked from the shadows of the wings towards the stage, her posture perfect, her head held high. The stillness was over. The storm was about to break. Guests were no longer talking amongst themselves. They were watching, waiting. The drama was far from over, and they knew it. And now, the anchor announced, his voice regaining its cheerful cadence. "We come to a very special moment in the history of the Starlight Children's Foundation. For 25 years, this organization was guided by the indomitable spirit and loving hand of the late, great Adrian Davenport." A warm, respectful applause filled the hall. A large photo of Josephine's mother, elegant and smiling, appeared on the giant screens flanking the stage. He whispered something to Chloe, who giggled. The Davenport legacy, in his mind, was a relic. He was the future. Josephine took one final deep breath and stepped into the light. "Please join me in welcoming the new chairwoman of the Starlight Children's Foundation, Mrs. Josephine Davenport Pierce." A single, powerful spotlight hit Josephine as she emerged from the wings. Across the vast ballroom, 1,000 pairs of eyes were fixed on the pregnant woman in the emerald gown, her expression poised and unyielding. It wasn't the polite, scattered applause from before. It was a roar. It started at the head table, where her father stood, leading the ovation. It was a countermove. Josephine's gaze swept across the sea of faces until it landed on Nathaniel. His glass, halfway to his lips, froze in midair. The powerful man she had attached herself to was suddenly looking very, very small. She was just the tacky, foolish mistress, a casualty in a war she hadn't even known was being waged. She adjusted the microphone, her movements deliberate and calm. The applause slowly died down, replaced by a silence so absolute, so heavy with anticipation, that a dropped pin would have sounded like a gunshot. She did not look at her husband. To look at him would be to acknowledge him, and he had ceased to exist in her world. He was now merely a problem to be managed, a piece to be swept from the board. It was her mother's voice, imbued with her own steely resolve. "Thank you all. I am deeply honored and humbled to accept the position of chairwoman for the Starlight Children's Foundation, an organization that has been the heart and soul of my family for as long as I can remember. My mother, Adrienne Davenport, built this foundation on a simple but unshakable principle, that our first and most sacred duty is to protect the vulnerable. She believed in integrity, in legacy, and in the strength of family. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. Trust, loyalty, moral compass. The subtext was so clear it was practically text. There is no place for those whose actions undermine the very values we profess to uphold." She picked up a sheet of paper from the podium. It was a legal document. This covenant establishes a morality clause for all board members and major patrons of this foundation. A collective gasp went through the room. He looked as if he had been turned to stone and was only now thawing, a look of pure panic in his eyes. "Their funding will be returned, and their name will be stricken from our donor rolls. Our name, the Davenport name, and the name of this foundation will stand for one thing and one thing only, unwavering integrity." The message was delivered. He was finished. The power he had craved, the acceptance into their world, had been revoked. "I will be leading this organization and raising my child under the name I was born with, the name my mother gave me." She had taken back her name, her power, her life, and her family's legacy, all in a 5-minute speech. "Thank you. And now, let us rededicate ourselves to the important work of helping the children." For a moment, there was silence again, the silence of a collective shock. Then one person began to clap. Then another, a man who ran one of Wall Street's most powerful banks. Then her father. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted. It was thunderous, a genuine, overwhelming wave of support and admiration. It went on and on, a relentless, rolling thunder of approval for the woman who had just dismantled his life with the grace of a concert pianist. The adoration in her eyes had been replaced with raw, animal panic. "Nate, what is happening?" He looked at her. Truly looked at her, and saw not a glamorous partner, but a terrified girl who had bet on the wrong horse. The other guests at his corporate table, men who had been laughing at his jokes and flattering him minutes earlier, now seemed to have developed a sudden, intense interest in their dinner rolls. They wouldn't meet his eye. He was a social contagion, and they were desperate to avoid infection. He saw Richard Callahan, a rival developer he'd publicly mocked just last month, approach Josephine. He had been excommunicated. Nathaniel finally growled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Their exit was a slow, agonizing walk of shame across 100 yards of plush carpeting that now felt like a mile of broken glass. The arrogance of the man toasted his own mistress. Chloe, her face blotchy and pale under her makeup, stumbled slightly, her stiletto heel catching on the carpet. The entire ballroom saw the graceless, ugly moment. They were a spectacle of ruin. A blinding barrage of camera flashes turned the rainy night into a flickering, disorienting nightmare. Microphones and phones were shoved in their faces. The reporters were like sharks in a feeding frenzy. "Mr. Pierce, is it true you've been removed from the Starlight board? Chloe, was he worth it?" That last question, shouted by a sharp-faced reporter from the Post, struck a nerve. He pulled Chloe through the scrum, her sobs now audible as they finally burst free onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking with fury as he tried to call his driver. As the screen lit up, a new email notification glowed ominously at the top. He was a billionaire on paper, but at this moment, he was locked out of his own empire. A sleek black town car, not his own, glided to a stop at the curb. The back door opened, but it wasn't a driver who emerged. Frank, who had once nodded respectfully to Nathaniel, now looked at him with an expression of cool, professional indifference. "Mr. Pierce," Frank said, his voice flat. "Frank, what the hell is this? Where's my car?" Nathaniel demanded, trying to cling to one last shred of authority. "Your service has been terminated," Frank replied calmly. "I'm instructed to inform you that your access codes and keys for the Fifth Avenue residence have been deactivated. Your personal effects will be packed and delivered to your office tomorrow morning." He then held out a thick, legal-sized envelope. Nathaniel snatched the envelope. He tore it open. The first page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." He looked up from the papers, his world tilting on its axis. He saw the town car's back door close. Through the tinted, rain-streaked window, he could just make out the elegant silhouette of Josephine. She didn't grant him so much as a final glance. He had been a casualty in a war he never even knew he was fighting. He had mistaken a queen for a pawn, and she had swept him and his entire world off the board. 4 months later, the first heavy snow of the season was falling on Manhattan. A thick, silent blanket that muffled the city's relentless energy and turned the view from the Davenport Foundation's offices into a living watercolor. The city below, once the stage for her public humiliation and triumph, now seemed distant, a problem solved. The story had a life of its own, becoming a parable of modern hubris. Nathaniel, the self-made titan, was now the poster child for catastrophic miscalculation. The board of Pierce Innovations, facing a shareholder revolt and a PR nightmare that was eroding their stock value by the hour, had convened an emergency meeting. The much-vaunted Japanese merger evaporated. He was radioactive. Chloe Decca had fared no better. After her tearful, self-serving television appearance was met with widespread derision. She was dropped by her modeling agency and became a social pariah. Her fleeting fame curdled into infamy, and she disappeared from public life. Josephine, in stark contrast, had become an unwilling but potent symbol of dignified strength. Magazine articles were written about her. She was not in her own office, but in the sterile, soulless conference room of her lawyer's firm on the 60th floor of a midtown skyscraper. The man across from her was a stranger. His face was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless stress. The final divorce settlement lay between them. It was an unconditional surrender. He had tried to fight, to challenge the prenup, to paint her as vindictive, but her team had been merciless, presenting irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, his misappropriation of joint funds for his mistress, and the tangible damage his public conduct had inflicted on the family name and its associated business interests. In exchange, Miss Davenport will not pursue further civil damages. Carter slid the final signature page and a heavy, expensive fountain pen across the table. "Then let's conclude this." Nathaniel stared at the paper, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the pen. The air in the room became heavy, the lawyers on both sides shifting uncomfortably. This was the moment Josephine had steeled herself for. She answered with the cool, unshakable clarity he had forced her to find. "You were the one holding the match. You stood on a stage in a room full of my family, my friends, and my life's work. You just assumed I would stand there and burn with you." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "This was a course correction. And you have no one to blame for that but yourself." The scratch of the nib on the thick paper was the only sound in the room, a final, definitive severing of their bond. His lawyers quickly gathered their papers and ushered him out of the room like a broken man. Josephine remained, staring at his signature. It was over. Her father entered the room, having waited outside. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's done," he said softly. She nodded, taking a deep, cleansing breath. "It's done." "Your mother," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have been in awe of you, Josephine. You have her grace, but you have your own brand of steel. You are stronger than any of us ever knew." A beautiful, healthy baby girl with a tuft of auburn hair and eyes that seemed to hold a deep, old wisdom. She named her Adrienne. As she looked down at her daughter, the chaos of the last few months, the gala, the speeches, the lawyers, the public spectacle, all faded into insignificance. That had been a war of necessity. This, right here, was the victory. Her triumph was this quiet moment. It was the creation of a safe, honest, and powerful future for this tiny, perfect life in her arms. A future built not on a foundation of lies, but on a bedrock of Davenport integrity. A dynasty, she thought, not just preserved, but reborn. The Starlight Foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams, and the Davenport name was synonymous with hope and integrity worldwide. Josephine had not only reclaimed her own life, she had built a new one, brighter and more authentic than she had ever imagined. She had shown her daughter, and the world, that a woman's greatest strength isn't just in surviving the storm, but in learning to build a new and better world in its aftermath. Josephine Davenport's story isn't just about a marriage ending. It's a masterclass in reclaiming power with grace, intelligence, and breathtaking precision. If her story of quiet strength and calculated victory resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner power. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story of unbelievable real-life drama. What do you think was Josephine's most powerful move?